The Hells Angels biker found the little girl forced into a leaking boat, and his retaliation shook the river town awake. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a cold evening, and the dark waters of the river reflected the dim glow of the town's lights. A sound echoed through the stillness, the desperate cry of a child. Out on the water, a small boat bobbed in the waves, its sides taking on water faster than it could be emptied. Inside, a little girl clung to the side, her trembling hands struggling to keep herself upright as the boat sank lower with each passing second. She was barely 8 years old, her clothes soaked through, her eyes wide with fear. She had been forced into this boat by men who had no care for her safety, and now, she was alone, stranded in the middle of the river with no way to escape. A roar pierced the silence as a motorcycle approached from the town. Jake Reaper Morrison, a Hells Angels biker known for his tough exterior and no-nonsense attitude, was heading home after a long ride. As he rode along the riverbank, the faintest sound caught his ear. A voice, high-pitched and panicked, echoed across the water. Without hesitation, Jake turned his bike toward the noise, his heart pounding as he recognized the sound of a child in distress. He parked his motorcycle on the muddy bank and hurried toward the water. His eyes locked onto the small boat that was sinking fast. He knew he had to act quickly. The water was freezing, and the last thing he needed was to get caught in it himself. But there was no time to think. He waded into the river, the cold water seeping through his boots as he reached the boat. The little girl looked up at him, her face pale with fear. She tried to scoot away, thinking he might be one of the men who put her there. Jake's hand extended toward her, and he spoke gently, trying to calm her. Hey, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm going to get you out of here, okay? She hesitated, her wide eyes filled with distrust, but something in his voice made her pause. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. As Jake pulled her from the boat and into his arms, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what he was doing. This was no ordinary rescue. This was a chance to do something right, to give this girl a second chance. He pulled her close, wrapping his leather jacket around her trembling frame to shield her from the cold. He noticed a scar on her cheek and a bruise on her arm, signs of a troubled past. But there was no time to ask questions now. He had to get her to safety. The girl's tears started to fall as they waded back to the shore. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rush of the river. Jake said nothing, his heart heavy with the weight of his past decisions. He had seen enough suffering to last a lifetime. But this moment, this child, was different. As they reached the bank, Jake spotted a small cabin in the distance. He would take her there, keep her safe, and figure out what happened later. But for now, he was focused on the task at hand. They had made it to safety. For now, that was all that mattered. But deep inside, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The girl's past, the men who had forced her into that boat, and whatever lay ahead, it was all coming for them. And Jake would not let it happen again. I'm not sure how long I can keep going. The river was relentless, but Jake pushed through, wading to the shore with the girl in his arms. As the cold night air chilled his bones, he made his way toward the small cabin he had spotted earlier, the sound of rushing water still ringing in his ears. The girl was trembling in his arms, her small body shaking from both the cold and the fear. She had barely spoken a word since he pulled her from the water, but he could feel her fear and confusion pressing into him like a heavy weight. Once they reached the cabin, Jake kicked open the door and ushered her inside, his eyes scanning the small room for any signs of trouble. It was just a simple place, a modest cabin that had seen better days, but it was safe for now. He set her down on the couch, his hands working quickly to grab some blankets from the worn-down shelf. Stay here, all right, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I'm going to start a fire. The girl nodded, but didn't speak. Jake could tell she was still processing what had happened, her wide eyes darting around the room nervously. As he moved to the fireplace and began stacking wood, his mind raced. Who were the men who had forced her into that boat? Why had they targeted her? His thoughts flashed back to his own painful memories, the scars of a life he had tried to leave behind. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this girl's story was somehow connected to his own. The fire crackled to life, the warmth filling the room, and Jake sat down beside her. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to break the silence. The girl hesitated, looking down at her hands. She was still so small, so fragile, and Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of protectiveness wash over him. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mia." Jake nodded, his gaze softening. "Mia, where did they take you from? Who were those men?" Mia's eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly, shaking her head. She didn't want to talk about them. Jake could see the fear in her eyes, and he knew pushing her further would do no good. For now, he just needed to make sure she was safe. "You don't have to tell me everything right now," Jake said softly. "But I need to know you're okay." Mia nodded again, her hands clutching the blanket around her. The silence stretched between them, the crackling fire the only sound in the room. Jake could feel the weight of his past pressing on him, but he didn't want to think about that now. He couldn't afford to. His focus was on Mia, on keeping her safe, on making sure nothing happened to her. As the night wore on, Mia slowly relaxed, her body beginning to warm up in the safety of the cabin. Jake stayed beside her, watching over her quietly, until eventually, she fell asleep. He knew he had to find out more about the men who had targeted her. He couldn't let this go. The thought of them still out there, somewhere, made his skin crawl. He would find them, and when he did, they would regret ever crossing his path. But for now, he would stay with Mia. He would keep her safe. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin, there was a fragile peace. Mia slept soundly, and Jake let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He was starting to feel something he hadn't in a long time. Hope. But he knew the storm wasn't over yet. There were still unanswered questions. The real fight was just beginning. I woke up early the next morning, the sound of the rain hitting the cabin's roof keeping me awake. It had been a long night, filled with quiet thoughts and the occasional crackle of the fire. Mia was still asleep on the couch, her tiny form wrapped in the blankets I'd given her. I looked at her, thinking about how much trouble she had already been through in her short life. The image of her terrified eyes as I pulled her from the water still haunted me. I didn't know who had put her in that boat, but I was sure of one thing. I was going to find out. I stood up slowly, careful not to wake her, and walked over to the small window that looked out onto the river. The water was calm now, the storm from the night before having passed. But I knew it wouldn't be long before trouble would come knocking. I grabbed my leather jacket from the back of the chair and slipped it on, my fingers brushing over the familiar patches on my vest. It wasn't just a jacket, it was my armor. It had seen me through countless battles, and I wasn't about to back down now. I had to do something for Mia, something that would make sure she would never have to go through something like that again. As I stepped out of the cabin and into the cold morning air, the first thing I noticed was how quiet the town was. It was too quiet. I had spent enough time on the road to know that when things were this still, it meant something was coming. I walked down the path toward the town, my boots crunching on the gravel. The small shops were still closed, their windows dark. But as I passed the diner, I noticed a man standing near the door, his eyes scanning the street. He looked out of place, and something about him sent a chill down my spine. I kept walking, not letting him see me, but my hand instinctively went to the handle of the knife I kept hidden under my jacket. I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't trust anyone in this town. As I approached the old sheriff's office, I stopped. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear muffled voices inside. I stepped closer, trying to make out what they were saying. One voice sounded familiar. It was the man from the diner. He was talking to someone inside, but I couldn't make out the words. I waited for a moment, then pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. I saw the sheriff sitting behind his desk, his face tense as he listened to the man from the diner. They were talking about Mia. I heard the sheriff say something about a missing girl, and the man in the diner was asking questions about the boat. I froze. They were looking for her. That much was clear. I pulled back, my mind racing. I had to get back to the cabin. I had to make sure Mia was safe. I turned and walked quickly back the way I came, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the cabin, I found Mia sitting up on the couch, her wide eyes watching me carefully. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice still shaky from last night. I didn't want to scare her, but I knew we had to move fast. "We have to leave," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Now." I could see the fear in her eyes as she stood up, clutching the blanket around her. "But where will we go?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. I just knew that staying here wasn't safe anymore. I grabbed her hand and led her outside. The rain had stopped, but the threat of danger still hung in the air. We didn't have much time. The town was looking for her, and I wasn't about to let them take her. We walked quickly down the road, my mind racing with options. I had to think of a plan, and fast. But as we rounded the corner, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A group of men was standing by a truck, their eyes scanning the street. They looked like trouble, and I could feel the tension in the air. I pulled Mia close, trying to stay out of sight. The men didn't notice us, but I knew we couldn't stay there much longer. "Come on," I whispered. "We have to move." We turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I led Mia through the back alleys of the town. We couldn't stay here any longer. But where could we go? I had to protect her, and I would do whatever it took to make sure she was safe. As we ran, I couldn't help but think about the trouble we were in. This wasn't just about the boat anymore. This was bigger. The town was hiding something, and I was going to find out what it was. But first, I had to get Mia out of here. We couldn't stay in this town any longer. The storm wasn't over yet, and when it came, it was going to be a hell of a lot worse. I led Mia through the alleys, my heart pounding as I scanned the surroundings. We had to keep moving. Every step felt like it could be our last. The men from the truck were still around, but I had no idea where they were. I couldn't afford to stop and figure it out. Not with Mia depending on me. Her hand was gripped tightly in mine, but she was silent. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. The terror in her eyes was enough for both of us to understand that we were in deeper than we thought. We couldn't go back. Not after what I had heard at the sheriff's office. They were looking for her. Whoever these men were, they had a stake in this town, and it wasn't just the boat. Something more was happening here, and I didn't like the feeling of it. As we rounded another corner, the sounds of footsteps grew louder behind us. Someone was following us, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stopped suddenly, pulling Mia into a small alcove between two buildings. We crouched low, the shadows hiding us from view. I could barely hear the footsteps now, but I could feel the tension rising in the air. I kept my breath steady, trying not to make a sound. Mia was trying to hold herself together, but I could see her eyes darting around, searching for an escape. "Stay quiet," I whispered. "We're going to wait here until they pass." The footsteps grew closer, and my heart raced. I had to stay calm. I had to protect her. If they found us here, it would be over. I wasn't sure what kind of people these were, but I didn't want to find out. The men passed by, their heavy boots echoing off the narrow street. I held my breath, my muscles tensed in case they turned around. But they didn't. They kept walking, heading further into town. I exhaled a long breath and slowly stood up, signaling for Mia to follow. "We need to move now," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mia nodded and stood beside me. We continued walking, this time sticking to the shadows and moving faster. The streets were still eerily quiet, but I could feel the town holding its breath. Every corner I turned, every step I took, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I needed to get us out of here, and fast. We came to a small park, the kind you wouldn't expect to find in a town like this. It was overgrown, with weeds creeping through the cracks in the sidewalk. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth. I glanced around quickly, checking to make sure no one was nearby, and then pulled Mia toward a bench in the far corner. "We need to lay low for a bit," I said. "Just stay here, and don't make a sound. I'm going to figure out what to do next." Mia sat down beside me, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening, Jake?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I looked at her, trying to find the right words. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, that we could just run away and leave this town behind. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. I had no idea what kind of trouble we were in, but I knew I couldn't run from it. Not anymore. "I don't know, Mia," I said softly, "but I'm going to make sure you're safe. I promise you that." We sat there in silence for a while, the only sound the rustling of the trees above us. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, but I couldn't show it. I had to be strong for her. For both of us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stood up. "I'm going to check things out. Stay here, and don't move, okay?" Mia nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. I hated leaving her alone, but there was no other choice. I had to find out what was going on. As I made my way back into town, I kept to the back streets, avoiding the main roads. I passed by the sheriff's office again, but this time, I didn't stop. I had already heard enough. Instead, I kept walking until I found myself in front of an old building on the outskirts of town. It looked abandoned, but something about it felt off. I approached slowly, my instincts telling me that this was where the answers lay. I stepped inside cautiously, my hand ready on the handle of my knife. The air was stale, and the building was dimly lit. I could hear the faint sound of voices coming from deeper inside. I crept closer, trying to make out the words. "They've been asking too many questions," one of the voices said. "We need to handle this." My pulse quickened. This was it. I had found the heart of the problem. But I wasn't going to let them take Mia. Not without a fight. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I had to act now. But I had to be careful. If I wasn't, everything I had done to protect Mia would be for nothing. I stood motionless in the dimly lit building, my heart pounding as I listened to the conversation unfolding before me. The voices were muffled but unmistakably tense. One of them, a gruff voice that sent a chill down my spine, spoke again. "If they keep poking around, we'll have to shut them up for good." The words hung in the air, thick with threat. I wasn't sure who they were talking about, but it was clear it had something to do with Mia. My grip on my knife tightened, the cold steel comforting in my hand. I needed to find out more, but I couldn't risk barging in too quickly. I had to be smart. I moved silently, slipping deeper into the shadows, my ears straining to hear every word. The sound of the voices grew clearer as I crept closer. "We've got to make sure she's gone. The kid doesn't know anything, but if she talks, it's over for all of us." I froze. They were talking about Mia. My stomach churned with anger, and every muscle in my body tensed. These men were planning to hurt her, and I couldn't let that happen. I took a deep breath, calming myself, and carefully pushed open the door just enough to get a glimpse of the room inside. It was a small office, cluttered with papers and old files. At the far end of the room, two men stood near a table, their backs to me. One of them, the one with the gruff voice, was leaning over the table, his face twisted in a sneer. "We'll handle it the same way as last time. No one will even know she was here." A wave of nausea hit me as I realized what they meant. They were planning to make Mia disappear. That couldn't happen. Not on my watch. I knew I had to act fast. I stepped forward quietly, positioning myself just outside the door, my eyes scanning the room for anything that could help me. The men were so focused on their conversation that they didn't hear me approach. I needed a plan, and I needed it now. I glanced around, my mind racing. There had to be something here that would give me an edge. My eyes landed on a stack of documents on the table. I couldn't read them from here, but they were important. I had to get them. I took a few steps back, planning my next move. I would grab those documents, get out of here, and figure out what to do next. I couldn't waste any more time. I turned to leave, but just as I did, one of the men's voices stopped me cold. I heard someone. "Check it out." My heart stopped. They had heard me. I cursed under my breath and darted into the nearest corner, pressing myself against the wall, holding my breath. I could hear the footsteps of one of the men growing closer. I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay hidden, but I couldn't afford to be caught now. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. For a moment, everything was still. I could feel the tension in the air, my pulse racing in my ears. Then, just as quickly as it had stopped, the sound of the footsteps moved away. I exhaled in relief. The man must have been checking something else. This was my chance. I made my move. I quickly crossed the room, grabbed the stack of papers off the table, and slipped back toward the door. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I couldn't slow down now. I couldn't afford to. I reached the door and stepped outside, breathing in the cool air as I tried to steady myself. The papers in my hand felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds, but I didn't dare stop. I had what I needed. I turned to head back to the cabin, but then I heard it. A car engine, revving in the distance. I froze. It was too close. They were onto me. I took off running, my legs burning as I sprinted through the streets, not stopping until I reached the edge of town. I looked back, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I couldn't see anyone following me. For now, I was safe. I slowed my pace, but my mind was racing. What had I just found? What was in these papers that had them so worked up? And most importantly, where was Mia? I had to get back to her. I couldn't keep running. I had to protect her, no matter the cost. I turned and ran back toward the cabin, praying that I wasn't too late. When I reached the cabin, I stopped at the door. The silence was deafening. I pushed the door open slowly, and my eyes immediately scanned the room. Mia was gone. I rushed inside, panic rising in my chest. There was no sign of her, no note, nothing. I searched the cabin, my heart sinking with each empty corner I checked. They had taken her. Whoever these men were, they had found her. I had failed. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't lose her. Not now. Not after everything. I grabbed the papers from the table, my mind racing. I had to find her. I had to make them pay. I couldn't believe it. I had searched every corner of the cabin, but Mia was gone. My heart raced as I ran through the empty rooms again, every step echoing in the silence. She had been here. I could feel it. But now, she was nowhere to be found. I slammed my fist into the wall in frustration, my mind reeling. I should have stayed with her. I should have kept her closer. But it was too late for regrets. I couldn't change what had happened. The only thing that mattered now was finding her. I grabbed the papers I had taken earlier, my eyes scanning them quickly. There had to be something here that would lead me to her. As I flipped through the pages, I saw a name that made my blood run cold. Jenkins. The same man I had overheard in the sheriff's office. He was connected to the group of men who were after Mia. I didn't need to see more. I knew what I had to do. I stuffed the papers into my jacket and headed straight for the sheriff's office. I was done playing games. It was time to confront the people who had taken Mia. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I walked briskly through the streets, my mind focused on one thing, getting her back. The town was quiet now, almost too quiet. I could feel the tension in the air, like something was about to explode. I reached the sheriff's office and pushed the door open without knocking. Inside, the sheriff was sitting behind his desk, his face hard as stone. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "You're making a mistake, Morrison," the sheriff said, his voice low and cold. "You don't know what you're dealing with." I didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm not leaving until you tell me where Mia is." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he motioned for me to sit down. "You're too late. She's already gone." My stomach twisted, but I didn't let it show. "Where?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The sheriff sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Jenkins has her. And he's not the kind of man you want to get involved with." I didn't need to hear more. I knew who Jenkins was. He was the kind of man who wouldn't hesitate to hurt someone, especially a defenseless little girl. "Where is he?" I demanded. "Tell me, and I'll make sure this all ends right now." The sheriff hesitated, his eyes darting toward the door. "You won't make it out of this town alive if you go after him," he warned. I didn't care. I wasn't leaving without Mia. "I'll take my chances," I said. The sheriff sighed again and stood up. He walked over to the filing cabinet, pulling out a map of the area. He handed it to me without a word, his fingers lingering on the edge of the paper. "This is where he's hiding. But don't say I didn't warn you." I didn't waste another second. I folded the map and shoved it into my pocket, heading straight for the door. "You're making a big mistake, Morrison," the sheriff called after me, but I didn't stop. Mia's life was at stake. Nothing else mattered. I didn't know what kind of place I was heading to, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Jenkins was dangerous, and he had the kind of power that could crush anyone who stood in his way. But I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. I was her only chance. I drove quickly, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. The map was clear, and I knew where I had to go. It was a small cabin on the edge of town, hidden deep in the woods. The trees grew thick, blocking out most of the sunlight, making it feel like I was driving through a tunnel. My heart pounded in my chest as I got closer. I didn't know what to expect when I got there, but I knew I couldn't walk in unprepared. I pulled over a mile away from the cabin, parking the car behind a thicket of trees. I grabbed the knife I had hidden in the back seat and slipped it into my jacket. I wasn't going to let Jenkins get away with this. As I walked toward the cabin, the hairs on. The back of my neck stood up. Something didn't feel right. I knew I was close, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I moved quickly, staying low to the ground, my footsteps silent as I approached the cabin. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I stopped. I could see the cabin in the distance, the windows dark. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Two men standing outside the cabin, talking quietly. They were armed, and I knew they weren't just guarding the place. They were waiting for something. Or someone. I crouched low, trying to keep myself hidden, my mind racing. I had to get closer, but I couldn't risk getting caught. I waited for the right moment, my heart pounding in my ears. I had one shot at this. I couldn't mess it up. The men continued to talk, oblivious to my presence. I knew I had to move now, or it would be too late. Taking a deep breath, I stood up and sprinted toward the cabin, my heart racing. I was almost there. Almost. Then, suddenly, one of the men turned around, his eyes locking onto mine. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. The man's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. His face twisted in surprise, his hand reaching instinctively for the gun holstered at his side. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted forward, pushing myself to the limit as I dashed toward the cabin, knowing I couldn't afford to slow down now. The man shouted something, but the words were lost in the rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could hear the other man behind him yelling, but I didn't stop. I had to get inside. I couldn't let them take Mia. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the door of the cabin, slamming my shoulder into it. The door creaked but held firm. I didn't waste any time. I pulled the knife from my jacket and rammed it into the doorframe, forcing the lock open. The wood splintered with a loud crack, and the door swung wide. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner. I scanned the room quickly, my eyes falling on Mia. She was sitting on the floor, her hands bound tightly behind her back, her eyes wide with fear. She was trembling, but when she saw me, something in her face changed. A flicker of hope, of recognition. "Jake," she whispered, her voice breaking. I rushed over to her, kneeling beside her and quickly cutting the ropes that bound her wrists. She winced as the ropes were pulled away, but she didn't say anything. "You're safe now," I told her, my voice steady but full of emotion. She nodded, still shaking, but she didn't say anything. The sound of footsteps approaching from outside made my blood run cold. I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back of the cabin, trying to move as quietly as possible. "Stay close," I whispered. I could hear the men outside, their footsteps getting closer. They were just outside now, and I had no doubt they knew I was inside. I had no time to waste. I looked around for a way out, but the cabin was surrounded by trees, and the only way out was through the front door. There was no way I could face them head-on, not without backup. I needed a plan. I turned to Mia, my mind racing. "Listen to me," I said, crouching down to her level. "I need you to stay quiet, and stay close to me. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes wide but determined. I could see the fear in her face, but there was something else there, too. A strength. I had to get us out of here, and I couldn't let anything happen to her. "Good," I said, taking her hand in mine. "Stay low, and stay with me." We made our way to the back of the cabin, the sounds of the men growing louder. They were only a few feet away now. I didn't have much time. I pulled open the back door as quietly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. Outside, the air was cool and damp, the trees heavy with the weight of the storm that had passed through earlier. We slipped into the woods, moving quickly and silently. The sounds of the men searching the cabin faded behind us as we made our way deeper into the forest. I could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but I didn't hear them following. We were getting away, but I knew it wouldn't be long before they came after us. They couldn't let us go. They wouldn't. We moved further into the woods, the trees growing thicker as we went. The path was rough, the ground uneven, but I didn't care. We had to keep moving. Mia was doing her best to keep up, but I could see her struggling. She was exhausted, and I knew she was scared. "Mia, you're doing great," I said, squeezing her hand. "Just keep going. We're almost there." The woods seemed endless, the darkness swallowing us whole. But finally, I saw the faint outline of the road ahead. We were close to the edge of the forest. I picked up the pace, but just as we reached the clearing, I heard it, the sound of a car engine. My heart skipped a beat. I looked back, and sure enough, a black SUV came tearing down the road. They had found us. They weren't giving up. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Mia along as fast as I could. We sprinted toward the road, but the SUV was gaining on us fast. I knew we had no chance of outrunning it. I had to think fast. I looked around, my eyes scanning for anything that could help us. I spotted a small dirt path leading off the road, disappearing into the trees. Without thinking, I pulled Mia toward it, my heart pounding as I heard the SUV screeching to a halt behind us. We ran as fast as we could, our footsteps heavy on the dirt, but I could already hear the sound of the car doors opening. They were close. Too close. My mind raced. I had to get us out of this. I glanced at Mia, her face pale with fear, but I could see the resolve in her eyes. She wasn't giving up. Neither was I. I knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning. I could hear the SUV behind us, its engine roaring as it came closer. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. We were running blind through the woods now, the path getting narrower and more treacherous with every step. I could feel Mia's grip tightening on my hand, her breaths ragged as she struggled to keep up. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay. But deep down, I knew the odds were against us. There was no place to hide, no way to outrun them. They would catch up eventually. The sound of the engine grew louder, and I glanced over my shoulder just for a moment. The SUV was nearly on top of us now. I pulled Mia harder, urging her to go faster, but I knew there was only so much we could do. I spotted a small hill up ahead and made a snap decision. This way, I shouted, pulling Mia toward it. The incline was steep, but it offered a bit of cover. We scrambled up the hill, my heart pounding as I glanced back again. The SUV was right there now, its headlights cutting through the trees. They were getting closer, and I could hear the tires crunching on the gravel as they approached the base of the hill. We had to move faster. As we reached the top, I paused for a second to catch my breath. My mind was racing. We couldn't just keep running. We needed a plan, a way out. But before I could think of anything, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the trees behind us. They were here. I turned, ready to fight if I had to, but what I saw next caught me completely off guard. The man who emerged from the trees wasn't one of the men I had seen earlier. He was older, wearing a dark leather jacket with a patch that I recognized immediately. It was the Hells Angels insignia. My mind went blank for a moment. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, trying to hide the shock in my voice. The man raised a hand, signaling for me to calm down. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "I'm here to help." I didn't trust him, not for a second. "Help?" I echoed, still holding Mia close. "How do I know I can trust you?" The man didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on me, studying me as though he was trying to decide whether or not I was a threat. "Because," he said, his voice steady, "I know who you're running from, and I know what they're capable of." I didn't move. I was still trying to process the situation. I had no idea who this guy was or what he wanted, but he didn't seem like the enemy. At least not yet. "We need to get her out of here," he said, nodding toward Mia. "And I can help you do that." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Help. We could actually get out of this mess. But something still didn't feel right. I needed more answers. "What's your deal?" I asked. The man paused for a moment before answering. "I'm part of a group," he said. "We've been watching these guys for a while. We know what they're doing to people like her." He nodded toward Mia, who was still holding on to my side, her eyes wide with confusion. "And we've been waiting for the right moment to strike. I think that moment is now." I didn't know whether to trust him or not, but at this point, I didn't have many options. "Fine," I said, my voice low. "What do we do next?" The man's eyes flicked toward the path we had just come from, where the SUV was still parked, its engine idling in the distance. "We need to move quickly," he said. "Follow me." I hesitated for a second, but then nodded, gripping Mia's hand tightly. "Stay close," I whispered to her, my eyes scanning the woods for any signs of movement. We followed the man as he led us through the trees, staying low and moving as silently as possible. The woods felt like they were closing in on us, the branches reaching out like claws. But the man seemed to know the way. He moved with purpose, his eyes constantly darting back to check on us. After what felt like an eternity, we finally came to a small clearing. The man turned to me, his face hardening. "This is it," he said. "We're safe for now, but we need to keep moving. You can't stay in this town any longer." I nodded, still trying to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. Mia was still clinging to me, her small body trembling. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone take her again. I would fight, I would protect her, and I would do whatever it took to make sure she stayed safe. I turned to the man. "Where do we go?" "From here," I asked, my voice steady despite the fear bubbling up inside me. The man looked at me for a long moment, then turned to lead the way. "You trust me?" he asked, his voice low. "Because from here on out, it's going to get worse before it gets better." I didn't have much of a choice. "I trust you," I said, my voice firm. The man nodded and began to walk, signaling for us to follow. The danger was far from over, but at least now, we had a chance. I would keep Mia safe, no matter what it took. I followed the man through the dense woods, my heart pounding as we moved deeper into the unknown. Mia was silent beside me, still clutching my hand tightly, her small frame trembling. I couldn't blame her. The whole situation had spiraled out of control in ways neither of us could have predicted. The man who had offered to help us, he didn't have a name, not yet at least, kept moving with purpose, but there was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't just leading us to safety. He was part of something bigger, something I didn't fully understand. I wanted to ask him questions, to find out more about who he was and what he was involved in. But right now, there wasn't time. I had to keep Mia safe. That was all that mattered. We reached a clearing in the woods, and the man paused, glancing around as if making sure we weren't being followed. The sound of the SUV's engine had faded, but the danger still felt real. "We're not safe yet," he said quietly, turning to face us. "But this is a temporary safe house. We'll regroup here for now." He motioned for us to follow him inside a small, weathered cabin that seemed to blend into the surrounding trees. The door creaked as he opened it, and we stepped into the dimly lit room. It was modest but sturdy, with a few chairs, a table, and a small wood stove in the corner. The man led us to a corner of the cabin, and I finally let go of Mia's hand, allowing her to sit down on one of the chairs. She was still wide-eyed, still in shock, but she didn't make a sound. "I'll make sure we're not followed," the man said, moving toward a window and peering out through the cracks in the curtains. "You two stay put." As he did that, I noticed something in his demeanor. He wasn't just a regular guy. There was something hardened about him, a calm intensity that suggested he'd been through situations far worse than this one. I couldn't help but wonder who he really was. "Why are you helping us?" I asked quietly, not wanting to spook Mia. The man turned back to face me, his expression unreadable. "Because I have a score to settle with the people after you," he said, his voice cold. "And I don't leave anyone behind." He didn't elaborate further, and I didn't push. I had enough of my own problems. I glanced at Mia, who was sitting quietly, her face pale. She hadn't spoken since we had entered the cabin, but I could tell she was trying to process everything. "Are you okay?" I asked, kneeling in front of her. She nodded slowly, but her eyes were distant, as if she were somewhere far away. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My heart broke for her. She didn't deserve any of this. "I know, Mia," I said softly, taking her hands in mine. "But we're going to get through this. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. I promise." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with silent questions, but she didn't speak. I wasn't sure if she fully believed me, but she was trying to hold it together. And that was enough for now. The man stepped back from the window, his expression grim. "We need to move again soon," he said. "This place isn't as secure as we'd like. We'll need to lay low for a while, and that means keeping a low profile." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Where do we go from here?" I asked. The man didn't hesitate. "There's a network of people who can help us," he said. "They're our best chance to stay off their radar." "Who are they?" I asked. He shook his head. "I can't tell you everything just yet. Trust me, I'm doing this to keep us all safe." I wasn't sure what to think of that, but at this point, I didn't have many options. "How long until we move again?" I asked. "Not long," he replied. "We'll leave before dark." As he finished speaking, I heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine in the distance. My heart skipped a beat. The men who had been chasing us were closing in. The man quickly moved to the window again, peering outside. His face hardened. "They're coming," he said, his voice tight. "Get ready. We're not staying here a second longer." Panic surged through me, but I didn't show it. I grabbed Mia's hand again, pulling her to her feet. "We're leaving, right now," I said, my voice low and steady. The man nodded, his face serious. "Stick to the plan," he said, "and don't look back." We made our way to the back of the cabin, the man leading the way as we slipped out into the woods once more. The forest was our cover, and the further we got from the cabin, the safer we would be. I could hear the distant sound of the SUV's engine getting closer. They were closing in. The tension in the air was suffocating, but we kept moving, my mind racing with thoughts of what would happen next. I knew we couldn't outrun them forever, but I also knew I wasn't going to stop until Mia was safe. And whoever these men were, I was ready to make them regret ever crossing our path. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me as we moved through the woods. The man led the way, his steps sure and steady, while Mia and I followed close behind. I glanced back once, twice, but there was nothing. No sign of the men who had been chasing us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching, waiting for us to slip up. Every creak of a branch underfoot, every rustle of leaves, made my heart race. The man in front didn't speak, and neither did Mia. We moved in silence, the only sound the crunch of our feet against the damp forest floor. I wanted to ask him where we were going, but I kept my mouth shut. I didn't know who he was, but I knew one thing for sure. He was keeping us alive. And right now, that's all that mattered. We reached a small clearing, and the man stopped, turning to face us. "We'll rest here for a while," he said quietly, scanning the area for any signs of danger. I nodded, though I had no idea what was coming next. "What now?" I asked, my voice low. He glanced at me, then at Mia, and sighed. "Now we wait." The words didn't make me feel better. I had been running, constantly on the move, and now I was supposed to wait. I didn't have the luxury of patience. I had to find out who these men were, what they wanted with Mia, and why they would go this far to get her. I looked at Mia, who was sitting on a rock, her small body curled in on itself. She was trying to stay calm, but I could see the fear in her eyes. It was there, lurking beneath the surface. She was still just a kid. She shouldn't have to be running for her life, hiding in the woods. This wasn't fair. "How much longer are we going to be out here?" I asked, breaking the silence. The man's eyes met mine, his expression unreadable. "Until it's safe," he said, his voice steady. "We need to know where they are before we move again." That wasn't enough. I wasn't about to sit here and wait for them to come for us. "We need to take the fight to them," I said, the anger rising in my chest. "I'm not running anymore." The man didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, sizing me up, and I could see the hesitation in his eyes. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice low. "You're not dealing with regular people here. These men are dangerous. They won't stop until they get what they want." "I don't care," I snapped. "I'm not letting them hurt her. I'm not going to stand by while they tear our lives apart." The man studied me for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "I get it," he said, "but you need to understand something. They're not just after her. They're after both of you. And they won't hesitate to use whatever means necessary to get what they want." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just Mia they wanted. It was me too. That meant I had a target on my back as well. I felt the weight of that realization settle in my chest, but I didn't let it show. "So what do we do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to find out where they're keeping their headquarters," he said. "We need to get in, get the information, and get out before they know we're there." That didn't sound easy, but it was the best shot we had. I nodded, steeling myself for what was coming. "When do we leave?" I asked. The man glanced at Mia, who was still sitting quietly, her face pale but determined. "We leave at first light," he said. "We can't afford to wait any longer." We spent the next few hours in silence, keeping our voices down and our movements slow. The man kept watch, scanning the area for any sign of danger, while Mia and I sat quietly, trying to stay calm. I could feel the tension building between us, but I knew we had to stay focused. In the morning, we would move. We would find the men who had been hunting us, and we would get the answers we needed. It wasn't going to be easy, but I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when Mia's life was at stake. As I sat there, watching the moonlight filter through the trees, I realized how much this had changed me. I wasn't the same person I had been when this all started. I had a purpose now, a mission, and I would do whatever it took to make sure Mia was safe. The sound of the forest at night was eerily quiet, and I found myself listening for any sounds of pursuit. But there was nothing, just the whisper of the wind through the trees. It was peaceful, but I knew better than to get comfortable. We were far from safe. And tomorrow, the real battle would begin. The thought of it made my stomach twist with anxiety, but I couldn't let fear stop me. I had to keep moving forward, for Mia's sake. I glanced at her again. She was staring up at the stars, lost in thought. She hadn't said much, but I knew she was scared. She had to be. But she was strong. Stronger than I had ever given her credit for. She had been through more than any kid should have to endure. And I was going to make sure it ended. The men who had taken her, the ones who thought they could control her, they were going to regret it. Tomorrow, we would take the fight to them. I woke up to the sound of the forest around us, the faint rustle of leaves carried by a gentle breeze. It was still early, the sky just beginning to lighten as the first hints of dawn crept through the trees. I hadn't slept much, my mind racing with the plan we had set for the day. Mia was still asleep, her head resting against the tree where we had spent the night. I glanced at the man who had helped us, the one who had led us to safety. He was up already, scanning the horizon with a watchful eye, his face hard, focused. He wasn't the type to talk much, but I had learned enough about him to know he wasn't here just to help us. He had his own reasons, his own war to fight. But right now, that didn't matter. What mattered was getting Mia to safety and finding the answers we needed. I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb Mia. The man noticed me and gave a brief nod, as if to acknowledge my presence, but didn't speak. I wasn't sure what to expect when we set out today, but I knew we were about to walk into a hornet's nest. The men chasing us were ruthless, and the stakes had only gotten higher. I couldn't help but feel a tightness in my chest as I thought about what was coming. I had made a promise to Mia that I would protect her, and I was going to do everything in my power to keep that promise. I glanced back at her, still sleeping, her face peaceful despite everything that had happened. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax. It was easy to forget the danger when I saw her like this, so vulnerable, so innocent. But I knew better. The world was still out there, closing in, and I couldn't afford to be distracted. "We need to move," the man said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but steady. I nodded, signaling Mia to wake up. She rubbed her eyes sleepily, but didn't say anything. She was used to this by now, the constant moving, the uncertainty. I couldn't imagine what it was like for her, having her entire life turned upside down, being forced to run and hide. I took a deep breath, checking my gear and making sure I was ready for whatever came next. The man led us through the trees, keeping a fast pace, never stopping to rest. I had no idea where we were going, but I trusted him. If he said we had to keep moving, then we had to keep moving. The path was rough, the underbrush thick, but the man knew the woods like the back of his hand. I had to admit, there was something reassuring about his presence. He didn't question, didn't hesitate. He just acted. "We're getting close," he said, his voice low, his eyes scanning the path ahead. We had been walking for hours now, the ground uneven, the air thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. I didn't know where we were headed, but I trusted him. "How much farther?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Not much," he replied. "Just keep going." We moved in silence for a while longer, my thoughts racing, trying to anticipate what would happen when we finally reached our destination. I could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. The tension was palpable, a thin thread stretched taut between us. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew it was going to be dangerous, and I had no choice but to face it. We reached a clearing, the man stopping at the edge, his eyes scanning the area. "This is it," he said quietly. "We wait here." I didn't question it, but I couldn't help but wonder what we were waiting for. The man wasn't saying much, but I could tell he was preparing for something. I glanced at Mia, who was standing quietly beside me, her eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of fear. "Stay close," I said to her, kneeling down to her level. "We're almost there, okay?" She nodded, but didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I could see the trust in her eyes, the faith she had in me. It was more than I deserved, but I wasn't about to let her down. "We won't be here long," the man said, his voice steady. "I'm just waiting for the signal." "The signal?" I asked, confused. He turned to me, his eyes cold but steady. "A friend of mine is close by. Once we get the green light, we move. But for now, we wait." I didn't like the idea of waiting, but I had learned to trust him. We had no choice but to play by his rules. The sun was rising higher now, the warmth beginning to seep into the clearing. The quiet hum of the forest was the only sound, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I looked at the man, who had his eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for something I couldn't see. I was starting to feel the weight of this moment, the tension thickening in the air. What was coming next? And why did I feel like the storm was about to hit? The silence stretched on, the minutes crawling by, and all I could do was wait. Waiting wasn't easy, but I knew that soon enough, everything would change. The waiting was almost over. I just had to hold it together a little longer. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on us, the tension so thick you could almost taste it. The man stood still, his gaze fixed on the distance, waiting for the signal that would set everything in motion. Mia was close by, sitting on a fallen log, her body curled in a way that seemed to suggest she was trying to be small, invisible. I knew she was scared, who wouldn't be? But she was also quiet, calm even, her eyes scanning the woods around us, as though she could sense the danger that was coming before I could. I couldn't help but glance at her, worried. She was just a kid, too young for this. Too young to have her life torn apart by forces beyond her control. I had promised to protect her, and I would. The man had his back turned, and I decided to take the chance to speak with Mia. I knelt beside her, my voice low. "How are you holding up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to mask the concern I felt inside. She looked up at me, her eyes wide but focused, like she was processing everything that had happened, taking it in slowly. "I'm okay," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just tired." I could hear the fatigue in her voice, but there was something else there too, a quiet resolve. I wasn't sure where it came from, but I was proud of her. "We're almost through this," I said, placing my hand gently on hers. "We're going to make it out of here, I promise." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of her mind. And I couldn't blame her. We had been on the run for so long, hiding, constantly moving, never knowing what would happen next. And now, it seemed like the end was near, one way or another. "Do you think we're safe here?" Mia asked suddenly, her voice trembling slightly. I hesitated for a moment, looking around the clearing. The man was still standing at the edge, his eyes scanning the horizon, waiting for something only he seemed to see. "For now, yeah," I said, my voice tight. "But we have to keep moving. We can't stay here for long." She didn't respond, but I could tell she was thinking, processing. It was clear that, in her mind, nothing was ever truly safe. And she was right. The world we were in now wasn't the same as it had been before. The men who had taken her, the ones who were after us, they weren't just ordinary people. They were dangerous, powerful, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. "It's going to be okay," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Mia looked up at me then, her eyes filled with a strange mix of determination and fear. "I trust you," she said softly. Those 3 words hit me harder than I expected. I had been keeping her safe for so long, but hearing her say that, hearing her trust me, made everything feel heavier. I had to keep that trust, no matter what. I looked over at the man again, who had turned back toward us, his face hard. "It's time," he said simply, his voice gruff. "We move now." I stood up, offering Mia my hand. She took it without hesitation, standing up beside me. The man started walking, his pace steady and purposeful, and we fell in a step behind him. We didn't speak as we moved, the only sound being our footsteps crunching through the dry leaves and the distant call of birds. The woods were eerily quiet, and it felt like we were the only ones left in the world. I kept my eyes scanning the path ahead, alert to every sound. We walked for what felt like hours, the sun rising higher in the sky, filtering through the branches of the trees. The further we went, the more I could feel the weight of the situation. We were getting closer to whatever the man had planned, but I had no idea what that was. I trusted him, more than I should have, maybe, but there was still a part of me that wondered if I was leading Mia into something even worse. We stopped at the edge of a ridge, where the man motioned for us to take cover. "This is it," he said, his voice quieter now. "We'll wait here." I could see that Mia was exhausted, her small body swaying slightly as she tried to stay awake. I helped her sit down, and for the first time in what felt like days, we took a breath. The man moved to the edge of the ridge, crouching low and scanning the area with sharp eyes. I wanted to ask what we were waiting for, but I knew he wouldn't answer. We were playing by his rules now, and all I could do was trust that he knew what he was doing. The hours passed slowly, each minute dragging on. I tried to keep Mia calm, talking to her in low, soothing tones, but I could feel my own nerves building. I had no idea what was coming next, and the uncertainty was unbearable. The man didn't speak again until the sun had nearly dipped below the horizon. "We move now," he said, standing up. "Get ready." We stood, following him as he led us down the ridge and into the thick forest once more. The darkness was falling fast now, and I could feel the temperature dropping with each step. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. Mia was still holding my hand, but I could tell she was starting to tire again. "Just a little longer," I whispered to her. "We're almost there." She didn't respond, but she squeezed my hand tighter. We kept moving, every step bringing us closer to whatever lay ahead. And the closer we got, the more I could feel the storm coming. It was getting darker, colder, and I knew something big was about to happen. I could feel it in my bones. The air was thick with tension as we moved through the dense woods, the darkness enveloping us like a blanket. The man led the way, his pace steady, unwavering, while Mia and I followed closely behind. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crack of a branch beneath our feet. I could feel Mia's grip on my hand tightening as we moved forward, her small body pressed against mine, as if drawing strength from me. I kept my eyes on the man, trying to read his movements, but there was nothing to go on. He was a shadow, his presence almost blending with the night. We had been running for what felt like days, constantly looking over our shoulders, never knowing if the danger was right behind us or just out of sight. But tonight, we were finally reaching the place where it all would end. The man had promised we were getting close, and I had no reason to doubt him now. The trees parted slightly ahead, and in the faint light of the moon, I saw a clearing. My breath caught in my throat. In the middle of it, standing like a fortress, was a small cabin. "We're here," the man said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I could feel Mia's breath on my cheek, her small hands still gripping mine. "This is the place?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The man nodded, his eyes scanning the area. "This is where it ends." My heart raced as I glanced back toward the trees. The men who had been hunting us, who had been relentlessly tracking us, were close. I could almost feel their presence, cold, calculating. I wasn't sure what we were going to do once we got inside that cabin, but I knew we couldn't stop now. "Stay close," I said to Mia, my voice steady despite the fear bubbling up inside. She nodded, her face pale, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. She trusted me, and that trust had to be enough. We crossed the clearing and reached the cabin, its wooden door slightly ajar. The man pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking as it moved. Inside, the cabin was dimly lit, a single lantern hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows on the walls. It was sparse, no decorations, no comfort, just the bare essentials. But there was something about it that felt like a safe haven, even if only for a moment. The man moved to the corner, checking something on a table, and I guided Mia to a chair, where she sat, her eyes darting around the room. "What now?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. The man didn't answer immediately. He was checking the locks on the door, making sure everything was secure. "We wait," he said after a long pause. "They'll be coming for us soon." My heart sank as I realized what that meant. This wasn't over yet. "How long do we have?" I asked, my voice tight. "Not long," he replied. "We need to be ready." My mind raced, but there was nothing else I could do. I had to trust him. As the minutes ticked by, the air grew heavier, thicker. I could hear the distant sound of an engine in the woods, too close. They were here. I moved to the window, trying to see through the cracks in the wooden shutters. I could make out shadows moving in the distance. "They're here," I said, my voice low, warning the man. He didn't seem surprised. "Get ready," he said, his voice calm, almost detached. "We don't have much time." I nodded, stepping back from the window. I looked at Mia, who had been silent, her eyes wide. "Mia," I said, crouching down in front of her. "Stay low, stay quiet, and do not move unless I tell you, okay?" She nodded, her lips trembling, but she didn't say anything. I knew she was scared. Hell, I was scared too, but I couldn't let her see that. The man checked his gun, loaded it, and then turned toward us. "When they come in," he said, "we move fast. No hesitation." "Got it," I said, my voice steady. "We'll be ready." The seconds felt like hours as we waited in the quiet cabin, the only sound the occasional rustling of leaves outside and the heavy beating of my own heart. Then, without warning, the door burst open. The men stormed in, their footsteps heavy, their faces masked with intent. I stood immediately, positioning myself in front of Mia, ready to do whatever it took to protect her. But the man was already moving, his hand steady, his gun aimed at the intruders. "This ends now," he said, his voice cold and commanding. The men hesitated, the surprise in their eyes quickly turning to rage. But before they could make another move, the man fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the cabin, and the men froze. There was no going back now. The chaos had begun. "Get out of the way," one of the men shouted, trying to push past the man. But it was too late. In a blur of movement, the man fired again, sending the attackers reeling. I stood my ground, my heart pounding in my chest, as Mia cowered behind me. I couldn't let them take her. I couldn't let them win. The man pushed forward, grabbing one of the men by the collar and shoving him out the door. "Get out," he shouted. The remaining men scrambled, realizing they were outmatched. One by one, they retreated, backing out of the cabin. And just like that, the fight was over. The silence that followed felt deafening. My heart was still racing, but I allowed myself a moment to breathe. It was over, for now. Mia was safe. And I wasn't going to stop until I made sure she stayed that way. The man turned toward me, his eyes hard, but with a flicker of something else. Relief, maybe. "We're done here," he said. "But we're not out of the woods yet." I nodded. "I'm not letting her out of my sight again." The man gave a curt nod, and then turned to leave the cabin. We were safe, at least for now. But the journey wasn't over. I couldn't rest yet. Not until I knew Mia was completely free of danger. And that meant facing whatever came next. I wasn't ready to back down. Not when I had everything to fight for. In this thrilling chapter of Hell Angel Stories, we dive deep into the life of a Hell's Angel biker caught in a battle between loyalty, danger, and unexpected protection. The journey follows a tough and seasoned biker as he rescues a vulnerable young girl, only to find himself entangled in a web of conspiracy and violence. As they run from relentless pursuers, the biker's skills and unbreakable willpower are tested in ways he never imagined. With the stakes growing higher and time running out, this Hell Angel story takes you on a heart-pounding ride through dark forests, hidden cabins, and intense confrontations. As the biker pushes forward to keep the girl safe, facing danger and betrayal at every turn, the story unfolds with intense action and raw emotion. Each moment is a reminder of the sacrifices made and the dangerous world the Hell's Angels inhabit. With each decision, the biker grows, and so does the mystery surrounding the men chasing them. If you love stories full of grit, courage, and unexpected twists, this Hell Angel story will keep you on the edge of your seat. As they face off against the dangerous men hunting them, you will be drawn into a world where survival means everything. The final moments in this Hell Angel story reveal the strength of the human spirit and the unbreakable bond formed between the biker and the young girl, whose life is changed forever. Prepare for an unforgettable journey filled with action, suspense, and a look into the harsh realities of the world of Hell's Angels.